Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Resilience Hubs, Model Overview and Community Case Studies. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group as part of our Resilient Power Project, and we have a really exciting lineup of guest speakers with us today. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few very quick webinar logistics. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can call in by telephone or use your computer mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console, you can use the orange arrow that you see circled there on your screen, and you can also use that to expand your webinar console. And one thing you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions and your comments. And we will save some time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A with the audience. We'll get to as many questions as we can. So do submit your questions. We'll get to as many as we can, as I said. One final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email with a copy of the webinar recording and a PDF of the slides within about 48 hours. And we'll also post all of those webinar materials on our website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. With that, I'll now pass it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Marriele Mango. Mari is a project director here at Clean Energy Group, and she will get us started. Over to you, Mari.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before I introduce our great list of presenters that we have, I'm just going to give a quick introduction as to the Clean Energy Group. Clean Energy Group is primarily a foundation-funded nonprofit organization. Our work involves providing technical assistance and policy support, as well as information sharing on clean energy topics. Our partner organization, the partner organizations we partner with include state and federal agencies, industry leaders, utilities, developers, NGOs, grassroots organizations, and national labs. We also have a sister organization, Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a membership coalition of organizations, primarily state agencies that manage clean energy funds. This presentation is brought to you by Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project. The Resilient Power Project was created in response to Superstorm Sandy and the resulting outages in the Northeast, the impacts of which disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income communities. Since then, we've expanded our work and are currently active in resilient power advocacy and project development across the country. The Resilient Power Project aims to improve access to resilient power technologies, primarily solar PV and battery storage, in low-income communities and communities of color. Resilient Power Project partners include community organizations, nonprofits, indigenous-led organizations, affordable housing developers, and local governments. Our focus areas are policy development, one-on-one technical assistance, project development, and awareness building, including publishing reports like those pictured here. You can find many more resources at our website, which is listed here as well. This is a great indication of the areas which Resilient Power Project has served. Through one-on-one technical assistance and solar and storage feasibility assessment support, the Resilient Power Project has assisted over in 250 projects across the country in solar and storage development. Most of these projects are located in historically underserved communities, and many highlighted on this map are located in the East and the West Coast, but I wanted to note that we are increasingly supporting partners throughout the Midwest and the Southeast, and increasingly in every state that's been impacted by the impact of climate change. If you're interested in learning more about the Resilient Power Project or how we can support your project, I encourage you to visit the Technical Assistance Fund portion of our website. Now for today's presentation, we have a great group of presenters today to talk to you all about Resilience Hubs. The first presenter today will be Kristin Baja. Baja is the Director of Direct Support and Innovation at Urban Sustainability Directors Network. She is responsible for identifying, leading, and supporting innovative projects and training that actively transform local government processes and lead to proactive, respect-based change. She works to identify and compost archaic and discriminatory practices and to provide pathways for change rooted in courage, equity, and justice. Baja is the originator of the Resilience Hub concept and has been working on Resilience Hubs for over a decade. She holds a Master's of Urban Planning and a Master's of Science from the University of Michigan and is actively working on a Master's in biomimicry from Arizona State University. In 2016, she was recognized by the Obama administration as a champion of change for her work on climate inequity. After Baja, you'll hear from Chase Engelhardt. Chase is the policy analyst and organizer at Climate Resolve. Climate Resolve builds collaborations to champion equitable climate solutions. Climate Resolve connects communities, organizations, and policymakers to address a global problem with local action. They inclusively develop practical initiatives that reduce climate pollution and prepare for climate impacts in California. In his current role, Chase has managed hundreds of volunteers to serve unhoused youth and to fight for more equitable and sustainable housing and urban policies. Chase also organizes grassroots campaigns and conducts policy analysis around housing, transportation, land use, and climate resilience issues in the LA region. He has a BA in international politics from UC Santa Cruz. Lastly, we have Ross Keller, who joined the Cambridge Community Center staff as development officer in January of 2021. Ross's journey with CCC began as a volunteer, writing grants and securing funding for the center at the onset of the pandemic. Ross hopes to elevate the center's fundraising capabilities with a particular focus on raising funds to renovate its aging facility. The Cambridge Community Center has become one of the first resilience hubs in the Northeast that you'll hear about today. And in addition to the center's current food and supply pantry program and youth program, projects in the work include the installation of a solar and storage system, a commercial grade kitchen, and a new HVAC system. So we are very appreciative to have all three here today, and I can pass it over to Baja to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari. And I just want to thank you all for being here with us today and for having me here. First, I just want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the land of the Yamasee tribe in what is referred to today as present-day South Carolina. I just want to acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory and honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples that are still connected to this land on which I stand and speak with you all from today. Also just want to be very grateful to the partners on the call, a lot of incredible humans that I get to work with on a daily basis. So I'm very, very grateful for that. So waiting for slides, we'll see how that goes. All right, so I work for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, USDN, and I just have this honor of working with really incredible teammates and amazing people, some here that are on this slide and hundreds of others. And our focus is really on relationships, collective action, innovation, shifting to this proactive action space. And my position is more of this mycelium, so the underground connector that helps to bring in nutrients and resources and to help with ideas, but also to compost old approaches, which is a bit of the example here today. And the idea behind that, still waiting on the slides, sorry, is to move out of the transition out of emergency shelters. All right, so we have a bit of a delay. Let me see if I can go back. So to transition out of emergency shelters and really center the work on humans rather than centering it on hazards. The emergency response and recovery is really this damaging cycle, as well as my slide ability to move is also seeming to be damaged. But essentially, we're trying to get out of this cookie cutter. It perpetually harms Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it's a very response-based approach that creates a lot of harm. And so essentially, we're getting out of this idea of treating everybody the same, of having these emergency shelters or having this one-size-fits-all approach, because it doesn't work. And I think we've proven that it doesn't work in lots of cases. And so moving out of that, resilience hubs are attempting to reflect the uniqueness of the neighborhoods that they serve. And in that, really get out of this sort of cookie cutter way that we've been opening sites or thinking about disaster shelters or opening shelters in the event of a disruption and centering more on the disruptions or the hazards. I might ask Mari, it seems like the slides aren't advancing for me. So if you would just switch to the next one, that would be great. Old school way.
You can do that. And your webcam on.
Okay, I'm happy to turn it off too, but essentially the next slide, what I'm talking about is the definition of resilience when we're talking about resilience hubs. So resilience is not this bouncing back resilience that I think we hear a lot, but instead resilience for resilience hubs is this ability to really focus on the humans over the hazards, to think about our community's ability to anticipate, to accommodate, and positively adapt and or thrive amidst our changing climate conditions, and enhance our quality of life, to think about more reliable systems, conservation of resources, thinking about all of the different opportunities, but doing so in a site that is neighborhood centered and centered on the humans. So we're looking at this holistic, year-round sort of element, and really focusing on adaptive capacity, getting out of the idea of that hazard-based approach and recognizing that people's needs aren't being met now. So how are we looking at resilience in the everyday, and then also bringing in these other components and things that we know are changing from climate change? Next slide. So a resilience hub in itself, and sort of this definition of resilience hub, is that it's really a community node. It is a physical building, and Mari, if you get a chance to switch to the next slide, it requires essentially governments and stakeholders to willingly shift power to members of the community. It consists of this center building, or this sort of space, with often a lot of landscape or other opportunities around it. It provides backup electricity, access to resources such as food and water and ice and charging stations, but it's supposed to be a place to support those community cohesiveness, so the before, during, after disruption, that year round, and strengthening our communities by having these sort of programs and spaces and opportunities to come together. One of the things I'll mention, and I think I'm going to say this several times, is that there are no two that are alike, and that's intentional because no two communities are alike. And so we also really are emphasizing, and what you'll hear me say is that there's key elements or pieces that we have found really work to help make a resilience hub activate and move forward in a community, but there's so many sub-elements, and those all have to be identified and really embraced, embodied by the community in order to be effective. So just noting that. Next slide. So with this next slide, these are the sort of 5 main components that have come out of, or sort of foundational areas that have come out of the decade of work I've been doing on resilience hubs. And instead of resilience hubs just being this idea of a power system, so putting on a solar with battery backup system, or a hybrid solution that has sort of a backup generator, we're really focusing on programs and services, communications, the building and the surrounding landscape, the operations, in addition to the power systems. And so when I mentioned things like services and programs, these are ones that are going to be used year round, ones that could be things like maker spaces or job training opportunities. A lot of times it's childcare opportunities, or the ability for people to come together. And some of those services may be things like basic access to first aid or medical or dental care. There's a lot of things around programs and services and a lot of variability there, but the big point is that there's a range. The communications component is then thinking about what is a way that we're bringing people together and getting to know each other proactively, so that in the event of a disruption, there's already those relationships built. There's already that cohesiveness, that connectivity. The folks feel like they have someone who's checking in on them. And so there's opportunities for enhancing and improving and building upon things like the community emergency response team training, and getting out of the idea of it just being response-based and getting into more of that proactive relationship building. But also considering with communications, what are radios? How can we connect with the Emergency Operations Center? What are ways we're getting really good and clear information? And so that also will build out. The building and landscape component is critical. A lot of times people ask me, what are the best type of hubs? What are the best type of buildings? Typically, they're going to be sites that are already being well utilized and are trusted by the community. They're not movable because they need to be a space that people know they can go to and rely on, and that is always in a place that they can access. So that's a really big piece of this, of understanding that there might be different kinds of, there's resilient pods, there's an idea of like resilient mobility elements, but and really when we're talking about a hub, it is a building that's in one location and not moving. And it has things like air filtration, water capture and reuse. The building might be weatherized, but it has this opportunity to offer a lot of the things that the community may not have, in addition to certainly won't have in a big disruption. The fourth is the resilient power system component. Again, this seems to be the favorite right now. It is critical and important, but I will mention that if we had only focused on resilient power systems in the event of COVID, these sites would not function to the capacity they could have. And you will hear from two of my brilliant partners later about how their sites did actually perform some of the assistance and needs during COVID. So there's certainly hybrid power solutions, a lot that we're thinking with solar battery backup, but also with sort of need for generators, thinking about timelines and types of impacts, but noting that that's not going to be the only component of a hub. And then lastly, and I think really importantly, is this operations and maintenance, making sure we have people paid who are going to be part of these locations. They're going to keep them up and functioning. They're going to be able to open them in the event of a disruption at no matter what time. So that's a critical piece as well. Next slide. And as those slides are moving, I will mention that there's sort of the way we're also considering resilience in these different modes when we're thinking about resilience hubs. This everyday non-disruption, the year-round holistic component where we have the opportunity to really start to enhance the building, to enhance the landscape, to bring in some of these other needs that the community may need. So gardening opportunities or connection opportunities or festivals or events, but also how are we retrofitting for the event of a disruption? So that's this opportunity in the everyday non-disruption. But within disruption, we also have these short-term things, these very quick shocks that are often referred to in this field, and then the longer-term sort of elements. And we're in the midst of or coming towards hopefully the tail end of a longer-term shock, which is the global pandemic. And then that recovery component, where recovery can be something that's quite quick, depending on the type of disruption, but also quite long. And having that site be able to support in all three of those modes is critical. Next slide, Mary. The other component I'll mention is that a resilience hub right now does not have one sole source of funding. We're working on it and hopeful for it. But at this point, a resilience hub is really not getting the type of funding that you would find for the emergency services or emergency shelters, or even sort of a lot of the community parks and rec spaces. So what we're really hoping for is to use a variety of different funding sources and understanding that things will be phased in over time. So we start with sort of these baseline of identifying with the community, what are the baseline needs that you have in order to be able to start functioning as a hub? You'll hear about some of this from some of the examples. And then what else do we need? What needs to happen in the next year to 3 years that really is critical in order to better meet those community needs, in order to be a better resilience hub? And then ideally, if somebody wants to drop $2 million or $2 billion or whatever the amount is in our laps, what would this site do? How would it function? How would it best serve the community? And that's going to be a really interesting way of phasing in over time, regardless of funding being available, understanding that not everything is going to be done immediately, and that we can't just wait for the whole site to be done, because it needs to be able to serve the community in the event of all of these needs, all the everyday and the disruption and recovery. Next slide. The piece that I'll mention as far as being able to engage with folks is we've kind of developed this platform for looking at these 5 resilience areas and then understanding the sort of normal everyday and disruption opportunities, and then sort of having community members identify what are the big components within each of these categories. And so these are sort of built out here in this spreadsheet, thinking about what is the baseline, the optional, and the ideal within those scenarios. So this is a lot of the way that we facilitate conversations with community members or even with local government or partners, to start with our big boxes around a hub, and then to identify in these different types of mode, what are the needs of the community? What are those immediate ones, and which ones can come later? And it's a really helpful process to go through, because it also aligns on what can we get done right away, and then what do we not have funding for, or what do we not have capacity for? Next slide. I also get asked a lot beyond like how to facilitate these sessions, what's the way to make the case? And when the next slide comes around, you'll see a list of ways that we talk about the return on investment. One of the biggest things is with the Emergency Operations Center, or other folks who are working sort of disaster recovery or response, a big component is that it's reducing the need for those sort of first responders for that sort of immediate help. So it takes out a lot of the phone calls to potentially a 911 or a 311. It removes the sort of need of what's going on and the lack of information flowing amongst communities. So having this trusted space really does have a return on investment. It's understanding where those return on investment are coming in. And some of this is through economic opportunities, some of it is through that cohesion cohesion and connectivity, and then some of it's over time and a lot of our ecological benefits that will have benefits for human health. But I think the key component is also to note that resilience hubs are not intended for every single neighborhood in a city or a county. They're intended to be in the areas that have been most marginalized and most disenfranchised, that have been ignored by government and partners for long periods of time, in an attempt to shift that power. Be aware of the fact that autonomy is desired most often by community members, and to shift into that opportunity for that autonomy. So supporting and becoming a supportive member in the hub at the neighborhood level, rather than dictating where they are and saying that everybody should have equal access. These are for intentionally marginalized and disenfranchised communities. Next slide. So USDN, as I mentioned, has been working on this for a long time. We have a website that's here. It's resilience-hub.org. Talks about what resilience hubs are, why we are doing them, how to get started. And then the next slide will talk about a bunch of USDN resources. So where is the white paper on Resilience Hub, the step-by-step guide on how to actually do them. There's an opportunity to use some of our spreadsheets and tools and resources, and then a lot around the solar and storage framework, which we've used partnerships to develop, including Clean Energy Group and American Microgrid Solution. The next slide is a bit about where hubs are in progress. And I really want to say one of the amazing parts of my job is I am able to work with incredible people like Chase and Ross, who you're going to hear from. Chase at Climate Resolve is USDN's official Southern California Resilience Hub partner, who helps to support the implementation in the entire SoCal region. And so we've been working together for the last 2.5 years to really support the hub development in that area, and they will continue to be an incredible partner for us moving forward. Similarly, Ross is a partner at a different scale, working at one site in Cambridge and really thinking about just that site and what needs to be done at that one site. So rather than this regional partner, very much a local partner, and really has that ownership over the site. So I'm excited for you all to meet and listen to them. I also just want to acknowledge that Clean Energy Group and American Microgrid Solutions are also USDN official partners who have been working with us in one specific sector, which is that resilience power sector, and supporting our members and our community-based partners in doing these feasibility assessments, understanding how we're moving forward on the solar and battery backup, and where are the opportunities that we have to bring in other solutions. So just awesome that we have so many sites that are in progress, but also fantastic that we have a ton of partners that are supporting that body of work. And with that, I am going to stop talking and stop giving grounding and turn it over to Chase, who's going to tell you all about the awesome Resilience Hub work in Southern California.
Thanks, Baja. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I'll wait for the slides to come up. I'm Chase Engelhardt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the policy analyst and organizer at Climate Resolve. And I'm excited to talk to you all today a little bit about the work that we're doing around resilience hubs. But just quickly to give you an overview of Climate Resolve's work, we're a climate nonprofit that is based in Los Angeles, primarily working in Southern California and a little bit at the state level in California. And we do advocacy around a lot of issues that intersect with climate change, like transportation, land use, housing, and urban resilience, urban cooling. But we also do project implementation. So we have an energy and water team that does energy and water benchmarking, building efficiency, install of clean energy, and other similar projects. We also do a lot of public education and outreach around climate science. And our core sort of idea is that we want to make climate science both accessible but locally relevant to people. So we work with a lot of downscaled models, really want to have people understand how climate impacts them specifically. As far as our work on resilience hubs, Baja gave you a really great background on how she has sort of fundamentally shaped this idea. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like in practice. So again, looking at sort of a cookie cutter model in Los Angeles, we have something called cooling centers, where we center the problem, heat, before we center the community in terms of our response. So we think heat, what do we need? We need a cool space. So on the right, you have a cool space And on the left, you have our the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, which is our pilot resilience hub in Los Angeles. And so the difference that you'll see is that one space, yes, has access to air conditioning. I'm sure it's quite cool in there, but it's just a bunch of folding chairs, right? There's no programming, there's no childcare, there's no food, and most importantly, there's no overall day-to-day programming at that space, unless you like to play pickup. So people aren't really thinking to go to that space on a hot day, right? There aren't integrated communications and all of these components that Baja talked about that are sort of more intrinsic in community spaces, right? Houses of faith or community-based organizations like the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory. And so the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory is a nonprofit, as you can kind of deduce from the name, that is sort of focused on the arts, but actually does a lot more than that. They're really trying to create opportunities for young people to take their passions and turn them into employment. They work a lot in the digital arts. They have their own radio station with DJs as young as 9 years old. But they also work with formerly incarcerated youth to help reignite their passions. They work on illustration. And they also have intergenerational programming. They do game nights and just different ways that people can hang out in the space. They have open office spaces for community members that are starting small businesses or just need a space to work. And so they really have sort of above and beyond their mission type programming, which kind of makes them an ideal candidate. And so taking the USDN model, our chief resilience officer in the city of Los Angeles had a conversation with the executive director in 2019 about potentially using this space for a resilience hub. And in 2020, Climate Resolve came on, and we were able to bring on a lot of other partners. So beyond just this space, it really is sort of a network of different service providers and community-based organizations in Boyle Heights that are working on this to create a sort of network of available services and intercommunicate, right? If somebody is in a space and needs access to healthcare or small business loans or other things, they can be referred to organizations that perform those services. Other partnerships that are really, really important to this, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the LA Clean Tech Incubator. We have access to different technologies, streamlining for permitting and other things that are really, really crucial that I'll explain in a little bit. And then at the statewide level, nationally, we've been working with Baja to really try and bring down a lot of the amazing content that they've created around the formation of resilience hubs and make that contextually relevant to Southern California with the threats that we face here and the needs in the community. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the first pillar of the work that we've been doing in Boyle Heights, which is community engagement. We started by just coming out and asking community members in these community co-design sessions how they interacted with the space already, right? Because in a lot of ways, the conservatory is already acting as a resilience hub. During the pandemic, they have been distributing masks and other hygiene supplies. They've been a resource for access to vaccination. And they provided a lot of mental health support for their young people. And so all of that was important to capture and then talk aspirationally about what it is that people wanted to see in the future. And so we talked about programming and we talked about infrastructure. And really what came out of these sessions is that access to reliable energy and water were really important to folks. We followed up these sessions with a community survey. So we surveyed 300 people in the immediate area and asked them about their experience with different climate and other threats and preparedness, resilience, and we got a lot of really interesting information. We learned that outdoor cooling was also really, really important for folks. and that we have a lot of outdoor workers in the community that are highly exposed to extreme heat. And then we also learned that as far as different climate impacts, the two that most concern the community were extreme heat and air quality. Boyle Heights is one of the most polluted groups of census tracts in the state of California. It ranks in the upper 90th percentiles on Cal EnviroScreen. And so air quality is already a pretty significant problem, but as extreme heat becomes more of an issue, you see a lot more formation of ozone, which is another concern. So there's a climate link with the air quality on top of the existing environmental racism that exists in the area. And so that was something we wanted to ground truth with the community, but we also asked about assets and needs, what people have access to and need access to. So a lot of folks reported having access to air conditioning in their home, but not quite everybody. In almost 40% of folks did not. And a lot of folks have stored food in an emergency plan. But what we learned is that air purification, having a lot of older adults living alone, and being medically reliant on electricity were things that we learned that we really wanted to highlight, particularly people who need to either refrigerate medicine or charge a medical device. That was something that we really had not expected from the community in such a high quantity. And so we adapted that into our planning for the space. And then as far as immediate needs in a disruption, food and economic support really stood out as high needs for the community. So being able to stage that space in a disruption for those things is really, really important. For communications, one thing that Baja talked about a little bit, but I wanted to highlight is that a resilience hub can really differ from a city space because there's not always a lot of inherent trust for local government. And in a place like LA County, where 11% of the population is undocumented, it can be really frightening to access a city space for fear of any kind of reprisal. And so having a community operated space that is known and trusted is really important, but also the cultural relevance and linguistic connection is really important in these communities. So in Boyle Heights, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking residents, but there's actually a lot of variety as well, with folks speaking Vietnamese, Zapotec, Tagalog, and Chinese. Give it just a moment here. Not sure why it is stuck. I don't know what's going on with the slides, but if somebody could advance those, I can just keep going. We kind of wrapped up this engagement and were able to raise $500,000 for programming and infrastructure with this information. And so what we're doing now is on the infrastructure side, we're installing a microgrid. We're able to work with Clean Energy Group actually to do a feasibility assessment, and American Microgrid Solutions implemented that. And we are now going through procurement on that system to install backup power and solar panels on the roof. And then we are currently designing a water storage and filtration system. And we are working on the programmatic side too to sort of amplify that resilience. The community really was interested through the survey as well in workshops on different topics. Some of the things would be what you would expect, like CPR and first aid, but also things like decolonizing your diet, so returning to sort of more ancestral dietary habits and access to food. And then also mental health, again, mental health resources and mental health first aid, and as well as de-escalation. So all of those are on the 15th, actually. We're going to be hosting our first series of workshops with the Conservatory on those topics. And then on the staff side, we're creating an operations manual and some training protocols. As Baja mentioned, the operational piece is really, really crucial. And so we are trying to sort of institutionalize that and really create those resources so the staff at the Conservatory feel prepared and have a grasp of how all of this is interacting together. Finally, at the statewide level, we are working with different partners and we're able to have $100 million set aside in the California state budget for resilience hubs. Oh, there we go. That's great. And so in order to sort of shape the way those funds are distributed, we're working with the Strategic Growth Council, and we have been meeting with all of the members of City Council in the city of Los Angeles to help raise awareness of resilience hubs and draw awareness to that source of funding so that when the time comes, we can help distribute that as efficiently as possible. We were able to work with the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to get, we already have brought over, at the bottom, you can see this technology called the MobiGen, which is a rolling battery. So we have a backup battery. It does not phase into the building, but we can run snakes now and at least charge medical devices in the event of an emergency, power emergency lights, and also, of course, on blue sky days, run event programming and that type of thing. So with that, I will hand it back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Chase. This was great. Next up, as we transition our slides, we will hear from Ross Keller. And just while we're in that, oh, sorry, Ross, while we're in that transition, just a reminder to please feel free to put in your questions into the question box. And other reminder that this is being recorded and will be available on our website, because I see a lot of the questions are pertaining to that, where you can rewatch it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited to talk to you. My name is Ross Keller. I'm Development Officer at the Cambridge Community Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if my voice sounds a little hoarse today, it's because I've been at a fundraising conference in Las Vegas, and it's very dry, and I've spent a lot of time telling people about resilience hubs. Quick history, Cambridge Community Center was founded in 1929 by a group of Black pastors because at the time, the local YMCA only accepted white men. So the pastors wanted to create a space where everyone could come and start to build community together. And ever since its founding, Cambridge Community Center has provided adaptive services and programs to meet the needs of the most under-resourced, underrepresented members of the Cambridge community. And our longest running program of over 50 years is our out of school time program for grades K to 8 that prioritizes social emotional development. We realize that some of our lead teachers are the adult that a student will spend the most waking hours with out of a year. So we take it very seriously. And most recently, we've actually brought on a full-time social worker who is on site to meet with students whenever they need. We also focus a lot on family engagement and building relationships with students and parents. We like to say that we don't only enroll students, but entire families. Our first teen program, can I just ask you to go through the slides? Can we go to the next slide? Our first teen program was created in 2013 by our now executive director, then programs director, Darren Cordy. It was the Hip Hop Transformation, or THT. Darren saw the need to create an opportunity for youth that were aging out of the OST program so that they could keep coming to the center, stay engaged, stay focused. THT also focuses on social emotional development, as well as teaching workforce skills through music creation, performance, and collaboration. The students have 8 albums on streaming platforms to date, and they've performed all over Boston, down to DC. Some really great young musicians have come out of the program, but the most important thing is to see some of the transformations that have been made from a student that is shy to socialize with their peers at the beginning of a summer, and 8 weeks later is collaborating on songs and performing in front of hundreds of people. The latest thing with TWHT is an expansion to 18 to 24 for the same reason, to provide opportunities to teens who are aging out of the program. Next slide, please. In 2018, Kwame Dance, a former board member, came to Darren with an idea to start a program called the Mental Health Access, the advancement of culturally competent education to stop stigma. Access teaches Black teens the realities of mental health and teaches them how to identify symptoms and indicators in themselves and others. The program also brings in a number of guest speakers, local Black mental health professionals, to introduce students to potential career opportunities in the field of mental health. So Kwame was studying for his PhD, and he realized the need not only to reduce stigma in the community, but also noticed the lack of Black professionals in the field, and hopes that as the program grows over time, it could start to even the scales. If we can go to the slide after that. Then in 2020, we had a disruption. Everyone had a disruption. So we shut down in March briefly, and started a phone tree, called all of our parents, all of our seniors, everyone whose number we had, and asked everyone what was the greatest need. And of course, the number one answer was food, followed by diapers. So we started a food and supply pantry, quickly partnered with a couple of great local organizations, Food for Free and Loving Spoonfuls, and starting small, but at the height of the pandemic, we're providing for up to 1,000 households weekly. Now about 750 households weekly, and we've given out nearly 4 million pounds of food. Helped a lot of people get through the pandemic and helped the center get through the pandemic. Volunteers in the beginning were middle class outside of the community coming in. And just to say something about our community, shortly after, all of the volunteers were people who were actually coming to the pantry to get food for themselves. Next slide. So backtracking a little bit to 2019, City Environmental Planner John Baldock came to our executive director and had identified CCC as a potential resilience hub. He put together a business and action plan, and we had a resilience audit conducted by Woodard and Curran. And then, like everything else, this was put on hold. Then in 2021, we were approached by Baja to become a resilience hub. And between our history of resilient programming and the addition of the pantry, we were on our way to doing this. We just needed a push in the right direction. The next thing was to find funding. So Baja and I worked together to apply for a grant from the Barr Foundation. Barr is a local organization that supports arts and creativity, education, and climate. Luckily, we checked all three boxes, or I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Before the pandemic, we had plans to upgrade, next slide, sorry. Before the pandemic, we had plans to upgrade our facility. First was a commercial grade kitchen, and we were working with architects, and we had a full design and specs laid out. Much to their chagrin, a bunch of this changed once we started working with Baja, because we realized that we needed to have the kitchen be as energy efficient as possible. The kitchen helps the center on a day-to-day basis in so many ways. Food is a huge part of the center, helps with feeding the kids, creating new programs, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the event of the shutdown, we'd have a large amount of refrigeration space and be able to put out hot meals for people for an extended period of time. Another thing we've been working on is an HVAC upgrade. Our gym doesn't have air conditioning. The second floor of our building doesn't have air conditioning. So not only will this allow us to expand our programming throughout summers, but in the event of a summer shutdown, this would make things much more comfortable. In the future, we're planning on a renovation, making the building ADA accessible, adding a new front entryway with a new ramp and an elevator. We're also planning on adding a pre-K classroom, which have certain specifications which none of our rooms currently have, so that we can offer our programs and services to even more people. Next slide, please. Next, resilient power. Every day the need to combat climate change increases, so we're making the transition to resilient power as quickly as possible. We're working with American Microgrid Solutions, who first conducted a feasibility analysis paid for by CEG as part of the BARF grant. So now they're sourcing and installing solar and battery for us. We're also working with a local organization, Climbable, to join a local microgrid, and then ideally use our pull in the community to get other places to join the grid as well. We've actually brought on a consultant from Climbable to help us navigate a field that's very new to us. And our electricians wouldn't be happy if I didn't mention that this project, everything first requires an entire electrical overhaul of the whole property. And if it sounds like there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, there are. I can't even see everybody on a Zoom call. It's a huge project and we have a lot of great minds in the room. Last slide. And then speaking of minds, our next project is to reimagine mental health care in our community. It's not fully in the works, but we're planning to acquire a second property from the city to open a mental health center, which will be led by now Dr. Kwame Dance. We've never found success when we refer youth in our programs to local doctors, so we want to create a safe space with doctors that look like the kids in our programs, where we can offer services to youth and their families during the time that they would normally be at the center. We have a lot of support from local officials and State Rep Marjorie Decker, so fingers crossed, this is our next resilient project and we're very excited about it. I'm sorry if I rushed any of that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. This was really such an informative discussion. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to go through as many as I can, but apologies in advance for those of you that we can't get to. Baja, I think this one, we'll start with you. We've gotten quite a few questions related to a lot of the progress in the discussion regarding resilience hubs is pretty specific to urban areas. What has been your experience developing Resilience Hub for rural areas, and are there any kind of specifications that they need to be looking at that are different?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and Resilience Hubs did start in urban spaces, but we have been doing a lot in more rural areas as well. What they've kind of turned into is it's very specific to the sort of geographic makeup of that location and also the connectivity with the surrounding urban center. We've done a lot of what we're calling a hub and spoke model, which is to have that big center hub in whatever the denser community space or area might be, and then to identify if that's not accessible for others to get to, having sort of these spokes or smaller mini hubs in different areas so that they have the backup supplies, the backup resources, and then some local community programming, but not the core community programming necessarily. It has to be reflective of all those areas. So it's a bit more of a hub and spoke model, and it does depend. I was just working with Maui County on a set of resilience hubs there, and they have roads that often become impassable. And so the situation is where there's a big hub in a bigger area or a more densely located area, and then some of these smaller hubs or spokes that take place that still support the community in the event of a disruption, but also are center areas for whatever the community priorities are. A lot of times in that area, it was food and water. So just noting a hub and spoke model has seemed to work thus far, and in rural areas, again, it still comes down to the way that people are going to access the site, come together and around those programs and services similar to the others.
Great, thank you. Chase and Ross, a lot of questions regarding how long it took to develop your Resilience Hub model. Is it continuously something in progress? How do you consider kind of milestones met? And then for you, Baja, is it possible to have kind of a Resilience Hub up and running quicker and ready for kind of, a lot of folks had questions about wildfire seasons coming up, things like that, or is this always a multi-year project? So Ross and Chase, I'll start with you.
I would say I would first quote Baja in the Resilience Hub is never, the work is never done. So it will be a process that will go on forever. And in terms of when it started, it's very interesting because, you know, we were a sort of resilience hub all along, and we just didn't, you know, have the term for it. So it just took, you know, people who it took Baja to let us know and point us in the right direction, and in where we needed to fill in the gaps. So I think we're in a really good place right now. We have a lot of room to grow, but the gears are spinning.
I'll plus one everything that Ross said and add that one of the beautiful things about resilience hubs is that things can be modular, right? So if there's an immediate threat that you already know that the community is worried about, yeah, you can turn that around relatively quickly, right? If you can make sure that you have an adequate filtration system in the HVAC, then yeah, you're sort of, well, I guess it depends on what you mean by ready for wildfire. In Los Angeles, I'm like, the buildings won't be on fire, right? The air quality will be really, really poor. And so it's like having the communications and the filtration ready. That can be done relatively quickly if you're able to prioritize that. You have strong partnerships with any sort of like permitting that's needed, but it depends on what it is that you're installing, right? The power piece of this is really tricky. You know, we're talking about buildings that a lot of the time are right between the sort of like single family home level, small scale solar and microgrid and like major commercial projects. So finding contractors that are able to do this sort of thing is a challenge. And that's something that we're working on. And hopefully, you know, the work that Ross is doing, that I'm doing, will help people kind of use that as a model and expedite that process. But turning around a microgrid right now, especially with the supply chain, is no small task. So yeah, I guess it's a unsatisfying answer, but it depends is kind of the answer. But for wildfire and air filtration specifically, yeah, you could absolutely set something up relatively quickly.
The only component I would add to that, and I want to echo and just say yes to what Ross and Chase said, is that anything can be done immediately if you have the folks who are interested in it and this sort of capacity to do so. So getting those basic needs and resources met, doing some of the proactive relationship building. USDN has a CERT level 11 that's completely based on getting out and helping people to relationship build. So CERT's not just in the event of the disruption. Some of the basic communications can certainly be installed and used relatively quickly. And as Ross said, they had that phone tree, really easy thing to put in place and can be done pretty proactively. Training opportunities. But as Chase mentioned, those bigger retrofits, those are just multi-year things, and they take, especially when they're existing buildings, they're massively complex. So to note it, my favorite is it depends, because it really does.
Great. And I'll just echo on terms of the resilient power side for solar and storage, you know, that is a process. And I would just recommend to anyone who's interested in getting that started, just to take the first step and get it started, as everyone was saying. Another question we got quite a few of was, is a key component of Resilience Hub from the USDN project perspective related to green jobs training, and who's actually installing the different components of a system or different components of a program? And Chase and Ross, did you have any green jobs training aspects of your process thus far?
So yeah, it's absolutely a jobs piece, but I think these two can tell you about the complexity of having a one and done pilot versus an actual solid jobs training. So turning it over to you, Ross, sorry.
We haven't had any green jobs training to this point, no.
Chase, did you have anything to add, or?
Sorry, yeah, I was just grabbing the unmute there. Yeah, so like Baja mentioned, right, I think when you're working with one specific project, that's a little more challenging. The other thing that I think you'll realize is that if you do have such a large organization that you're controlling in-house every aspect of the development of a hub, kudos. But, you know, we're working with a lot of implementing partners. You know, we're working with an engineering firm called ARP for the water and grid alternatives for the energy components, Grid Alternatives, they are essentially a clean energy organization that does training in that field and do a lot of community work. They're a nonprofit. So I think, partnership selection is a way to elevate that if it's a priority for you. And it kind of depends on where you are and what programs exist. But as Baja has mentioned before, right, each project is going to be very different in its priority. So if that's really high priority for the community, then you absolutely need to bring that forward. But you're also going to have a lot more social infrastructure for that, because the sort of foundational organization that's running the space will have some sort of capacity in that, right? So you're always kind of building out and around what the community-based organization or house of faith is doing in their day-to-day.
Great. I think, Ross, these questions speak a little bit to what you were saying earlier in terms of we didn't even know we were a resilience hub. A lot of questions have come in that what is the difference between a community center and a resilience hub? So I'm doing this work. I consider myself a community center, but I don't think I'd consider myself a resilience hub. What's the difference? How does that transition happen? How do you get this stamp?
I think that is a great question, and it's something that my ED and I have been thinking about a lot lately. And the way I've been thinking about it is like the idea that we're reimagining what a community center is. What we have going on right now, when I was growing up, if you had told me a community center, it's not what I would have thought. And I think that basically, if your community center is is meeting the needs of the community that you serve, you are on your way to being a resilience hub, and you just need to add where you can to fill in the gaps like we did. Fortunately, we've been able to get funding to go towards resilient power and to add new programs and to put work into the facility to better our programs and do more for the community. But it's basically just not prescriptive programming, but just finding out, being really in touch with the community and listening to what they need, earning their trust, so that you can really know that you're providing programs and services that are the highest priorities for the community.
The only thing I might add on to that is a community center does an excellent job of the programming and services, really excellent job. But a lot of times those elements of bringing in some of the bigger communications capacity, the extent of what Chase spoke to of the radio stations and being able to get out to different people who spoke different languages, knowing when the site can actually serve people in a disruption and how it can serve them, putting in these bigger systems and structures that help with long-term sort of needs around water and food and capacity. That's the difference is we're looking at sort of immediate, incredible things that are happening with serving community needs, and then also building in these other things that can radiate and become better for that proactive opportunity and the event to handle a disruption in both short and long term.
Yeah, it is a little bit of like a ship of Theseus type question, is like, where does it actually like become the hub? But I think, yeah, those answers are both right. And it's about like reframing too a little bit, I think, and having a more proactive approach to serving the community in terms of anticipating some of those needs. I mean, mutual aid is like as old as time, but trying to make sure that there are the resources and sort of forethought to expand the reach of mutual aid, I would say is like, it's like almost a mindset at that point. But behind that has to be the resources. So I think making sure that the partnerships are made and that resources are being brought to underserved communities, and that the resources are being sort of like allocated and distributed and shaped by those communities, that's when you've kind of like reached that level, right? Because you can start serving your community in that way immediately without the infrastructure. But that is like a key component. Otherwise, it's hard to be proactive without the money and the resources. So I would say that's like a key component.
So we only have time for one last question, and I'm going to try to pick the one that we got a lot of. And that is related to funding. So a lot of folks say that really the people who get to decide where resilience hubs are foundations that fund these actual projects. What would you get advice for folks that are on this journey and they're looking to do something? A lot of questions related to, did you have any utility partnership support when you're trying to develop the system? Was it kind of piecemealing different kind of funding together per project, or did you just go for one big shot to kind of encompass your entire thing? And I think this question could be for anyone, so please jump in.
Yeah, what I'll mention is I think we all have different circumstances related, and every site is different. It is a very much it depends kind of thing based on location, based on what the needs are from the community. We have a funding and finance platform and sort of support for the 5 resilience areas, but a lot of those weren't necessary for certain sites and some of them were. And so we're trying to streamline getting some of the federal and state funding to go through local governments to support these projects, but acknowledging that a lot of those are still restrictive. And so folks like Climate Resolve or Cambridge Community Center have had to write these grants to foundations to fill in the gaps that a lot of that other federal and state funding won't support, but is desperately needed as part of doing holistic resilience work. And so they've been really incredible in trying not only to maintain those relationships with local government partners so that that funnel of funding can happen, but also to look at what are these immediate needs and how do we get some of the philanthropic support or other opportunities. We have said, you know, by state, it's different by utilities and different partners, but it's really unique and different, which we say is an interesting puzzle to play.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is we're out there making the case right now, right? We're trying to not fundraise for just ourselves, but for everybody here, because we want to see this be successful. So Climate Resolve in Southern California, we're really talking to the private sector, but also I mentioned right at the state level, we're able to secure $100 million for resilience hubs. And I'll just say that, like, in general, in areas where you have brought the public sector on and there is that buy-in, that's where the infrastructural piece, I think, is really huge, because with public funding, it is very difficult to have like the longevity and sustainability of funding. So any sort of like capital costs you have, you're going to see that the private sector is very averse to that, and the public sector is like has more of an affinity for it. So that's kind of the model that we're trying to build in California, where the public sector and utilities are able to come in and handle some of the upfront infrastructure costs, and then that we get that buy-in from foundations in order to sustain the operations and programming. And with a community-based organization, you do have at least a little bit of that baked in, right? To just exist as a nonprofit, unfortunately, you're constantly having to fundraise. So we're trying to open up more sources of funding that are accessible. But I would say if there's nothing out there, you are going to have to find and make a case for building a pilot and showing how in your area this concept can scale. And that's really how we were able to convince our funders for this project, is to show, hey, we're working on unlocking this money at the state level, and we have this this site that can really be proof of concept, and this could be much bigger than this one individual location. So hopefully that's helpful. It's hard to give really specific advice based on where you are, but reach out to the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or if there are people who are doing this work in your area, it's really about that collaboration, because it's going to take all of us to really bring this concept to the fore.
Great, thank you so much. This has been a hugely informative webinar. I'd love to thank our presenters for talking about resilience hubs. I apologize for the questions we didn't get to. I tried to touch upon the ones that were the most asked. Please reach out to Clean Energy Group, and I'd be happy to forward any question you have to a specific panelist and make sure that someone gets back to you. We have a couple webinars coming up that I just wanted to highlight. A special shout out to the mobile solar and storage for emergency management. That's coming up next, as well as building community resilience with Green Mountain Power. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. This will be, this webinar was recorded and it will be posted on our website. So please feel free to watch again and share with your network, and reach out to myself, Marriele at cleanegroup.org if you have any questions. So thank you again, Ross, Baja, and Chase, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, y'all.